In the mansion where luxury served as a facade to conceal secrets, the maid was merely a shadow. Humiliated at every turn, watched at every step, the slightest mistake was enough to make her a target, and the mistake came as a trap. A sapphire bracelet disappeared, and accusatory fingers pointed at her. Whispers spread through the hallways, looks of contempt weighed heavily on her shoulders, and within minutes, her dignity seemed doomed. The millionaire, cold and distant, watched in silence, while his wife smiled with the cruel victory of someone who believes she has crushed an invisible enemy. But there was something no one knew. The mansion's cameras held secrets, and when they revealed the truth, history would change forever. In the main hall, the mistress held up the bracelet in front of everyone, accusing the maid of theft. The silence was heavy, broken only by the murmurs that spread like poison. The young woman, with unshed tears, swore her innocence, but no one listened. The only one who believed her, ran to hug her, and this simple gesture made everyone uncomfortable. The millionaire remained motionless, but there was something different in his eyes, as if doubts were beginning to emerge. And while his wife savored the public humiliation, she ignored that every corner of the mansion had eyes, discreet cameras watching everything. What they would soon reveal would not only change the story, but completely reverse the power struggle within that house. If this story has captivated you thus far, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. The mansion stood like a modern temple of glass and marble, reflecting the power of those who lived there. Iron gates guarded perfect gardens, hallways echoed with confident footsteps, and every detail seemed carefully crafted to maintain the image of perfection. But behind the heavy curtains and lavish parties, there was a cold routine, marked by arrogance and a ruthless hierarchy. The millionaire's wife reigned over that space like a ruthless sovereign, doling out orders and humiliations, especially against the blonde maid who circulated silently with her trays and cleaning cloths. Invisible to some, a target for others, she was remembered only when she needed to be demeaned. For his mistress, every small flaw was a spectacle. A misplaced glass, a poorly folded towel, any detail served as a pretext to make her a target of contempt in front of everyone. "You never do anything." "Right," he repeated with a smile that didn't hide his cruelty. His wife's friends laughed complicitly, as if humiliating her were part of the entertainment. The young woman lowered her eyes, swallowed her tears, and continued, sustained by necessity and a silent strength that kept her standing, even when everything around her seemed to conspire to break her. The millionaire, amidst contracts and meetings, rarely spoke. He observed from afar, cold, as if none of it concerned him. But there were moments when his eyes betrayed silence. They lingered for a moment on the maid, recording the dignity she maintained even amidst the contempt. It was something he wouldn't admit, not even to himself, but it was beginning to seep into his heart beyond his control. The son, small and lonely, noticed what the adults pretended not to see. He looked for the maid in the hallways, smiling when she offered him a hidden piece of fruit, or when she carefully arranged his toys. To him, that woman wasn't invisible. She was the only true presence in a house where everything seemed made of glass, beautiful on the outside but cold on the inside. This innocent bond was enough to awaken a fierce unease in his wife, turning every gesture into a reason to watch and distrust. And it was in this environment filled with gazes, secrets, and silences that fate began to sharpen its blades. One detail, a missing object, a misplaced bracelet, would be enough for all the maid's pent-up pain to turn into judgment. In that palace of appearances, the truth was still hidden, but the walls had eyes, and the mansion's cameras, silent and patient, would be responsible for revealing at the right moment who was truly guilty and who had been wrongly condemned. Mornings at the mansion always had the same ritual, a table set with expensive china, imported flowers in the center, coffee and juices arranged as if they were part of a stage set. The maid walked between the pantry and the main room with light steps, avoiding noise as if her very existence were meant to be silent. But it was in this routine that the wife found space to plant the first seeds of the trap. It began with subtle, almost imperceptible insinuations. When an object took a while to appear in its usual place, she would say aloud, "Funny, these things disappear lately." Her friends who visited her would laugh in agreement, oblivious to the weight her words carried. The maid, listening from afar, felt her heart sink, but remained silent. Her mistress observed every reaction and, satisfied with the unrest she caused, moved on as if nothing had happened. Over time, the comments became more direct. A lipstick that wasn't where it should have been, a piece of jewelry that took a long time to be worn, a key that kept moving. Everything became an excuse. "Do we have too many eyes in this house?" the wife would ask, casting sidelong glances at the maid, as if dropping an accusation without needing to name it. Guests picked up on the suggestion and carried it out of the mansion, spreading discreet rumors at dinner parties and social gatherings. The millionaire, for his part, seemed indifferent. He remained behind newspapers or screens, but his eyes, even if they didn't react in words, noted the uncomfortable repetition. It was as if something inside him sensed the trap, but chose to remain silent, a prisoner of his own image of coldness. The son, too innocent to understand the adult schemes, only noticed that the woman who welcomed him with gestures of kindness was beginning to carry a silent sadness in her eyes. The housekeeper, witness to every detail, risked a defense one afternoon. "Madam, perhaps it's just carelessness," she said, when her employer complained about a piece of jewelry out of place. But the answer came like a razor. "Carelessness is trusting too much in someone you shouldn't." And her gaze fixed on the young maid, who lowered her head, unable to protect herself. The days became more difficult. The other employees, afraid of becoming targets, began to withdraw. The silence in the hallways was even more suffocating, and even whispers carried tension. The maid's every move was watched, every step seemed already marked to be used against her. The employer, in her cruel vanity, planned every detail of the spectacle she intended to stage. And then came the first accusation disguised as a test. During an afternoon tea with guests, she rose from the table and said, "Theatrically, how strange my favorite bracelet isn't in its usual place. Could it be that someone decided to hide it from me?" Eyes immediately turned to the young woman who was holding a tray of cups. Blood rushed to her face, but she remained steadfast, simply fulfilling her role. The guests exchanged venomous smiles, and the rumor began to spread like wildfire. What the wife didn't know was that, as her words gained momentum, the mansion's silent cameras recorded everything. The plan seemed perfect, but fate had already chosen the moment to reveal the truth. Until then, the maid would be forced to carry the weight of suspicion, like a shadow that haunted her every move. While distrust was cultivated like poison in the mansion's corridors, an unexpected bond grew silently, the relationship between the maid and the boy. He, alone amidst the luxury, sought refuge in the simple gaze and patience of the young woman who never treated him as an heir, but as a child. And she, even, bearing the pain of being the target of veiled accusations, found in his innocence the only space of truth within those marble walls. Their time together came almost by chance. Sometimes, in the garden, while she was raking leaves, he would appear with a broken toy car, and she would gently fix it using whatever she had on hand. Other times, when her boss was busy on the phone, the boy would escape to the kitchen, where he would receive a piece of freshly baked cake or a glass of juice served in. Silence accompanied by a gesture of complicity. Small rituals arose from these encounters, drawings left hidden on the tray, notes scribbled in crooked handwriting, as if they were secrets shared only by the two of them. The millionaire watched from afar. Often he'd catch a glimpse of the scene, his son smiling like he hadn't in a long time, sitting beside the maid in the backyard, or dozing peacefully after she'd tucked in the covers. He said nothing, but each of these images remained etched. In his mind, like fragments of a truth he insisted on ignoring. The wife, however, noticed everything, and every gesture of affection between the employee and her son was a knife stuck in her vanity. She couldn't bear the child seeking comfort from anyone else, much less someone she considered inferior. Envy mixed with contempt, further fueling the silent hatred that had grown within her. "He's getting spoiled," she would say aloud, whenever she saw him run toward the employee. But deep down, what hurt her wasn't the spoiling. It was the uncomfortable truth that the child saw in the employee what he never found in his own mother: presence, affection, humanity. At a luncheon in front of guests, the scene repeated itself. The boy impatiently refused the food until the maid discreetly approached and offered him a spoonful. He accepted, smiling, and the table fell silent. The mistress, her face hardened, forced a laugh to disguise her embarrassment, but inside she burned with rage. That night, alone with her husband, she poured out her frustration. It's unacceptable that the boy prefers the company of a maid. This exposes us to ridicule. The millionaire didn't respond. He simply looked up from the newspaper and stared at his wife in silence. A silence that, for the first time, sounded like disapproval. The maid, aware of the growing tension, tried to distance herself. She avoided contact, leaving the boy in the care of the housekeeper, but the boy always sought her out, always calling out to her with that confidence that cannot be extinguished by orders. And although she feared her mistress's wrath, she could not deny the boy the attention he begged for with every glance. This bond, pure and innocent, was the spark that set the plot in motion. The wife, now consumed by envy, decided that humiliating the maid wasn't enough. She had to destroy her once and for all. The sapphire bracelet, forgotten until then, would be the perfect weapon. The house was about to become the stage for a cruel farce, but also a setting for revelation. Because where there is innocence and truth, fate always finds a way to expose the lie. The evening of the dinner arrived with pomp and fanfare. Imported cars lined up in front of the iron gate, and each guest's gaze was filled with curiosity, wanting to glimpse, once again, the millionaire couple's perfect life. The main hall was lit as if it were a stage for a show. Crystal chandeliers reflected in the wine glasses. The hand-picked flowers exuded an intense perfume, and the violins filled the air with a melody rehearsed to impress. The bride descended the staircase like a queen on a throne, draped in a red silk gown, smiling at every reverent glance. Everything seemed calculated to make that evening another victory of appearances, but something was hidden behind the scenes. The maid hurried between the kitchen and the dining room, balancing trays, adjusting cutlery, ensuring nothing went wrong. Her simple uniform clashed with the glitter of her surroundings, but her posture carried a dignity that, even in silence, drew attention. Her employer noticed, and that was precisely what bothered her most. At the height of dinner, as conversations mingled with the sound of violins, the mistress decided to act. She tapped her glass lightly with her fork, drawing everyone's attention, and said in a tone of false politeness, "Before dessert is served, I need to share something curious. It seems some precious things have been moving around my house lately." The sentence fell like a drop of poison in a crystal glass. Eyes swept across the table until they landed on the maid, who at that moment entered with a tray of wine. The boss continued, smiling, "Of course it could just be distraction, but sometimes when we trust too much we forget that certain people don't know their true place." There was a muffled laugh among the guests, the kind of laugh that hurts more than screams. The waitress felt her face burn, but she stood her ground, placing the tray on the table with hands that trembled inside but not out. The millionaire watched in silence, his gaze fixed on his wife, then slid to the young woman, who lowered her eyes to hide the tears she was holding back. He pressed his lips together, as if something inside him was about to explode, but he held himself back. His son, sitting nearby, noticed. He grabbed the maid's hand as she leaned over to serve him water, and this childish, yet powerful gesture caught the attention of some guests, who looked away in embarrassment. The boss, feeling the attention spiraling out of control, raised her voice even higher. "Just imagine," she said theatrically, "if one day an important jewel disappeared, how embarrassing it would be to discover that the trust had been placed in the wrong person." This time there was no laughter. The room fell silent, and the weight of the accusation hung in the air. The maid, motionless, felt each word turn into a chain around her neck. The public humiliation was complete, but contrary to what her wife expected, there was no relief in her eyes, only a spark of something resembling fear, because she didn't know that, In that same room, hidden in discreet corners, cameras were recording every gesture, every word, every look. And when the time came, it would be these silent witnesses who would turn the tide of fate. The morning after dinner brought apparent calm, as if nothing had happened. But in the mansion, the silence was merely the pause before the storm. The mistress paced back and forth in her closet, examining her jewelry with the zeal of someone who guards not only wealth, but also weapons. It was then that she raised her voice in mock astonishment. "My sapphire bracelet is gone!" The cry echoed through the house, and within moments all the servants were gathered in the hall, hastily summoned. The maid entered last, her hands still scarred from the morning's work, and found all eyes on her. His wife, with tears in her eyes, showed her bare arm. "My most valuable possession is gone. Someone messed with it where they shouldn't have." He paused dramatically, then concluded, "And we all know who's been roaming the house most freely." The eyes of those present darted around, and the atmosphere became suffocating. The millionaire, sitting in his leather armchair, kept a straight face, without a hint of reaction. But something was beginning to weigh on him. There was no proof, only accusations. And yet his lack of words was interpreted as agreement. His son, who was playing with building blocks in the corner, stood up and ran to the maid, grabbing her hand as if defending what he loved most. "She didn't do anything," he shouted, his voice trembling. The childish gesture froze the air, but the mistress didn't back down. With calculated movements, the wife ordered a search of the young woman's belongings. The housekeeper, embarrassed, led her to the small backs room and opened the drawer where there were only simple clothes and an old portrait of the maid's family. Nothing else. But suddenly a murmur echoed from the hallway. The mistress appeared with the bracelet in hand, claiming to have found the jewel hidden among boxes of groceries in the pantry. "What did I say?" she exclaimed, holding the object up in front of everyone as if it were a trophy. The maid felt her legs weaken. She tried to explain, but her voice wouldn't come out. I never touched that," she managed, her eyes brimming with tears. But no one seemed to hear. The poison had already spread. Whispers grew among the staff, and even some guests still milling about the house came closer, witnessing the spectacle. The millionaire stood up, approached slowly, but said nothing. He simply observed the scene, his gaze oscillating between doubt and suppressed anger. His hand clenched on his cane betrayed his internal struggle. He knew something was wrong, but his mask of coldness prevented him from speaking out against his wife in front of so many. His silence was the sentence everyone interpreted as condemnation. The mistress, triumphant, approached the young woman, and in a voice low enough to hurt only the two of them, whispered, "I told you you had no place here." Then she held up the bracelet before everyone and declared, "It is proven. The trust has been betrayed." The hall fell into a heavy silence, as if the house itself were holding its breath. But what no one knew was that this carefully staged accusation was nothing more than a trap, and what seemed like victory would soon be the mistress's downfall, because the mansion's invisible eyes, the cameras watching every corner, had already recorded the true author of this farce. The truth was recorded, waiting only for the right moment to emerge like a bolt from the darkness. Afternoon fell upon the mansion with a heaviness no light could dispel. The wife summoned the maid to the study, where the dark wood of the bookshelves seemed to swallow the air. On the table, the sapphire bracelet gleamed like a still damp tinder. "Sit down," she ordered, offering no chair. There was no place to rest. The security chief, embarrassed, stood by the door with a notepad in his hands. The housekeeper, summoned as a witness, stared at the floor so as not to lose her way. The millionaire was there too, arms crossed, the immobile face of someone who had learned to turn doubt into stone. The mistress began, in a soft voice that quickly became a blade, "Spare us the theatrics. Confess, and let's end this with dignity." The word dignity, spoken by her, seemed an insult. The young woman took a deep breath, her voice low so as not to tremble. "I've never touched that jewel." The silence that followed wasn't meant to listen to her. It was meant to squeeze the weariness into guilt. The wife insisted, setting the scene as if memorizing lines. "There are reports that you wandered through the pantry without authorization. The security chief cleared his throat, unable to sustain the entire lie. There was movement in the hallway. The mistress smiled, satisfied with the veneer. Movement, she repeated, as if to pronounce her verdict. Then she opened a folder with printed papers, one of them already folded to fit the size of her shame. A blank declaration, with the lines ready for confession. Sign it. It will spare everyone, including you. The maid stared at the page as if gazing into an abyss. She felt the skin on her hands sweat. She thought of her sick mother, the rent, the price of losing what little she still had, her own name. She didn't sign. The housekeeper, in an almost imperceptible gesture, took a step forward. "Perhaps we should wait for the system's full report." His wife cut the sentence in half. "I am the system." She turned to the young woman, now in a lower, more intimate and cruel tone. "You don't understand how the world works. People like you breathe what we allow." The sentence fell on the room like a slap without a mark. The millionaire clenched his jaw. The anger, which had been dormant until then, opened its eyes. Still, he remained silent. Anyone who has lived their entire life in the spotlight knows that speaking out is sometimes a kind of ruin. When the meeting broke up, there was no slammed door, only the sound of dignity being dragged down the hallway. The maid walked to the cramped room at the back and closed the door carefully, as if tending to a newly stitched wound. She sat on the narrow bed and opened the drawer containing the few things she had. 2 uniforms, a yellowed family photo, a rosary, a notebook with hand-copied recipes. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from her sister, asking if everything was okay. She didn't respond. Her tears lingered beyond words. In the courtyard, the boy escaped everyone's attention and appeared at the bedroom door. He said nothing. In his hand, he held an old button tied to a string, a medal of courage, as he called it. She bent down, took the amulet, and smiled as fully as she could. "Courage is remembering how to breathe," she whispered, restoring the strength the boy lacked. The housekeeper appeared close behind, took the boy back, and before closing the door left a manila envelope on the dresser. "In case you need it." Inside were some savings and a short note. "I've seen you be fair." As night fell, his wife spread the official version through the halls. "The employee is evaluating whether to confess." Trusted guests received messages with ready-made adjectives. The rumor gained shoes and began walking through the city. In the office, the millionaire stood alone before the window, the reflection of his own face blending with the darkness of the garden. He tried to remember all the times he'd seen her lie with charm, and all the times he'd seen the young woman tell the truth in silence. The sum, for the first time, didn't add up. The maid pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, the resignation letter she'd written months ago and never delivered. She read the brief lines, felt the weight of the now in her fingers, and still kept the return note. Leaving that night would mean giving her boss the final word. She would stay, not out of pride but out of justice, the minimal justice of not leaving her own name on the floor of the salon. She washed her face, straightened her uniform, and returned to work like someone going into a battle, without witnesses, without trump cards, with the stubborn courage of someone who knows that lies flash quickly but fade. Later, while the house was asleep, the head of security knocked lightly on the boss's office door. "Sir, there are inconsistencies in the schedule. Perhaps it would be prudent, to review everything again." The millionaire nodded without moving the rest of his body. Deep in his eyes, something had finally shifted. The weight of injustice, which had held him back all day, was beginning to push him in the right direction. On the other side of the wall, the boss looked in the mirror, searching for a face without cracks. She found the first ones, and in the mansion's silent cameras, the truth waited for dawn to begin to reveal itself. The following days were heavy as lead. The mistress, satisfied with the spectacle of the accusation, walked around the house as if she had won a definitive victory. Her comments now came in the form of sentences. "Some people need to learn that trust is a privilege, not a right." Each loud sentence made the young woman shrink further, and the servants understand that silence was the only way to survive. The rumor had already spread beyond the walls. In clubs, in social circles, at discreet dinners, People talked about the bold maid who had dared to betray the family's trust. But the millionaire couldn't sleep. In his office, he relived the scene of the found bracelet, the theatrical way his wife had appeared with the jewel in her hands, the forced tone of astonishment. It all sounded rehearsed. It wasn't proof, it was an act. He remembered the young woman's expression, her eyes teary but still firm, denying it, and, no matter how hard he tried to convince himself it was best to ignore it, he couldn't erase from his mind the image of his son screaming in her defense. One morning, he asked the security chief for timesheets. His voice was casual, but his eyes betrayed urgency. The man, uneasy, brought out printed papers with clock-in and clock-out notes. There were errors, incomplete records, gaps that didn't make sense. "Check it again," he ordered, and the chief nodded, knowing it wasn't a request, it was an order. His wife noticed the movement and approached, smiling. "You're not going to waste time with details, are you? The case is closed." He responded with a look that no longer betrayed blind obedience. Meanwhile, the boy became a shadow of his former self. He refused food, cried in his sleep, and begged for the maid with the insistence of someone who feels absence as a wound. His employer reacted coldly. "He forgets quickly. Children get attached easily." But the millionaire realized it wasn't just any attachment. It was trust, rare and absolute, that can't be bought. And realizing this hurt even more. The young woman, despite bearing the shame inflicted upon her, continued working. He hadn't resigned, even when all seemed lost. Every clean plate, every folded tablecloth, every silent order carried out was also a form of resistance. She wouldn't give her employer the taste of giving up. The housekeeper, a silent accomplice, left small gestures of support, a piece of fruit left on the table, a note hidden between tablecloths with a single word, "Stay strong." The millionaire began to observe her from afar. He noticed how she remained firm even under insults, how she treated the other employees with respect, how the boy lit up just seeing her enter the room. These details, so simple, were impossible to ignore. Her every gesture was a silent testament to her innocence, while his wife's every exaggeration seemed to bear the signature of a lie. The mistress, realizing the risk of losing control, tightened her grip. She banned the maid from certain hallways, reduced her food, and increased her working hours. She wanted to break her. But the more she tried, the more the millionaire perceived the contrast. On one side, cruelty. On the other, dignity. At night, standing in front of the mirror, he began to wonder who was really protecting the honor of the house. It was then that he made his decision. He called the security chief and said, "I want to see the footage, all of it, uncut." The man hesitated, his hand trembling as he adjusted the papers. "Sir, some of the recordings are missing." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. The millionaire leaned back in his chair, his face grim. He knew he was closer to the truth. He also knew that once it came to light, there would be no going back. The news spread from the gates like expensive perfume after a party, from coats, from hair, from conversations that continued in the parking lot. The next morning, the city already had a version of the story. The maid caught, the bracelet hidden in the pantry, the magnanimous boss who avoided calling the police so as not to tarnish anyone's name. In Miami cafes, voices repeated the legend with slight variations that added venom. It was close. It seemed she was playing the saint. The boy? Our children are easily fooled. The lie gained footwear and spread through neighborhoods. The young woman first noticed it at the neighborhood market. The cashier, who always joked about the weather, avoided her eyes. Two women fell silent as she passed the dairy aisle. A third pushed her cart and made room as if protecting her own purse. At the guest house, the normally kind owner mentioned delays that didn't exist, and quietly asked her guest to be careful with visitors, as if dignity could be smuggled in bags. The humiliation was now out in the world. At a beauty salon, two clients commented on the boldness of certain people. Her name wasn't mentioned, but her portrait was, blonde, uniform, silent eyes. At a hotel where she'd left her resume months earlier, the manager returned her smile with a cold smile. The position has already been filled. The automated email from another selection process said, "We've decided to move forward with candidates more in line with the profile." The profile, she discovered, rarely included someone whose name had been publicly skewered. Still, she persisted in surviving. She woke early, worked her assigned shifts, accepted laundry jobs in an old brickle building, cleaned emergency stairs without complaining about the smell of metal and dust, and delivered ironed sheets with the perfection of someone who doesn't want the world to find another reason to be there. At noon, she ate a sandwich sitting on the outside step, the heat rising from the asphalt, and thought about the marble house as if it were a bad dream someone insists on retelling. Meanwhile, the wife's circles spun with the choreography of self-preservation. Messages were carefully leaked. She had been generous, the family discreet, the employees alert. The boss smiled at brunches and launches, and when asked, she raised her hand in a gesture of closing the subject. Sad, but resolved. Her friends inclined their heads, complicit in the ritual. Luxury has its own language for erasing what is inappropriate. The millionaire began to feel the repercussions on the edges, a partner who, in an elevator conversation, commented that he would laugh at his lack of domestic control, a journalist who asked for a note about the incident, an advisor who, under the guise of zeal, suggested image shielding. He responded with short sentences and hard eyes. Inside, shame burned. Not because it was on the agenda, but because he knew the agenda was a lie, and that the lie had used his silence as a ladder. In the housekeeper, dignity found refuge. She discreetly called an old contact at a hotel chain. Look for a girl with calloused hands and a clear eye. He promised the young woman nothing. He simply gave her an address written on paper that didn't tremble. Come tomorrow. Tell her you know how to work when no one's looking. The girl nodded, as if receiving a glass of water in the desert. She spent the night copying into a notebook the routines she mastered with her eyes closed. Breakfast checklists, folding hospital sheets, the odorless shine of crystal glasses, as if she could prove to the world in writing that she had been on the right side all along. When the next day dawned, it rained. The city washed its rooftops, and for a few brief minutes the rumors died down. She went to the interview with her cleanest uniform and a rosary in her pocket. She answered without embellishment, offering hours and concentration, citing references that could speak for her. The manager listened silently and took notes. She made no promises. Her farewell was a short but solid phrase, "Good people find their way." The young woman descended the stairs with the light knees of someone who, even wounded, carries on. At the mansion, the mistress breathed a sigh of relief at the success of her own version. She opened her diary, confirmed attendance at 3 events, and ordered the flowers in the living rooms to be changed. The boy was drawing alone in the pantry, 3 figures holding hands, one with an apron and a heart where the pocket would be. His father entered and stopped. He didn't comment. The housekeeper, as she passed, pressed her lips together to contain her words. The rumor which her wife had released to the world was returning through the crack precisely where she had no say, in her son's eyes, in her husband's silence. The city continued, as the city continues. But like any tide, rumors recede when they hit a rock, and the first rock had already been laid. The young woman's persistence, the millionaire's discomfort, the child who wouldn't trade truth for etiquette. The poison still flowed, yes, but the antidote began to circulate invisibly through the small veins of history. The boy began collecting silences like someone collecting seashells. At breakfast, he would sit before his plate and, without touching his food, draw with his finger. In the steam from the cup, simple lines that always ended in the same figure, a woman in an apron with a heart in her pocket. The first night without her, he asked to sleep with the light on and held the button attached to the string he had called a medal of courage. The second, he took the little plastic boat to his bedside table. The third, he spread the drawings she had kept secret on the bedroom floor. The housekeeper, when turning in the sheets, found a folded piece of paper under his pillow. Courage is remembering how to breathe. The handwriting was childish, but the sentence seemed too adult to fit in those small hands. The millionaire, who had always paced his day with measured steps, began to slow down when he saw his son. He would stop at the door without announcing his presence and watch him play with the boat, pushing it across the smooth surface of the table as if it were water. One late afternoon, the boy dragged a chair to the window overlooking the garden and stared at the empty pool. "She taught me not to be afraid of the dark water," he said, without taking his eyes off the tile that still bore traces of the last party. "She's close. We breathed together." The father wanted to answer yes. She was close, but the words stuck in a place in his throat where procrastination resides. Instead of speaking, he approached, and, for the first time in weeks, sat beside the boy without looking at the clock. The silence between them had the exact sound of what was missing. In the kitchen, the routine had also changed. The mug of milk that used to appear with a chocolate star design now arrived clean, without any signs of care. The boy pushed the glass away, and the new, hastily hired maid pretended not to notice. One day, the boy escaped from the impatient hands and ran down the hallway to the pantry. He stopped in front of the shelf where the bracelet had been found and left there, with a solemnity only children know, the string medal. "So the truth can find its way," he whispered. The millionaire, who had seen the scene from a distance, felt the air thin. The image of his son offering courage to a place contaminated by lies clung to him like smoke. The nights brought a new kind of insomnia. In the office, the man leafed through reports that said nothing about what mattered. When he looked up, he saw in the reflection of the glass no longer the impeccable executive, but someone who had silently watched the injustice. The memory of his wife, emerging with the jewel among boxes of groceries, reappeared like a rehearsed scene. The media astonishment, the pause for the audience, the phrase that called for applause. There was something wrong with the choreography, the speed with which people were called into the room, the way the security guards were already positioned, the readiness of the speech. The more he went over the details, the more the performance gained momentum, and the more the performance grew, the more the humbly steadfast woman of his memory took the place of innocence. The housekeeper, who had learned to speak with her eyes, began to leave traces of a possible route. One afternoon, while serving coffee, she placed a transparent envelope with a timetable on the sideboard. The arrows marked in pen revealed gaps, empty minutes between her mistress's exit from the closet and the light turning on by itself in the pantry, a late entry in the private hallway that didn't match the public version. "Crockery inventory," she explained in case anyone asked, but the look she gave her master said otherwise. "Look." He quietly picked up the envelope, sat at his desk, and stood still with his fingers on the paper, as if feeling the pulse of a body crying for help. The boy persisted in his little liturgies. Before bed he would place the little boat on the bedroom floor, aligned with the door, as if opening a passage for someone to return. One of these nights, he called his father with restrained urgency. She said that when we're scared we count backwards, and he did, whispering numbers until sleep came. The millionaire realized that the boy's peace came not from explanations, but from presence. And in that recognition, something in him shifted from the place where he usually kept difficult things. The next morning, when he went down for breakfast, he found his wife telling friends over the phone how compassionate she was for not taking the matter to the police. The word compassion in her mouth sounded like stone. The boy, head down, was drawing the same 3 figures holding hands. His father took the paper, not to scold, but to look closely. He noticed in the pocket of the apron a heart, and within the heart a blue dot, the color of sapphires. The child unknowingly had made the map. The man folded the sheet and placed it in his jacket pocket, next to the small boat he had taken to carrying with him as a reminder of a rescue he himself had to perform inside the house. That afternoon, he walked to the security room. He didn't announce his decision. He simply said in a tone that brooked no turning back that he wanted to see the entire night before and the night of the discovery. The boss hesitated, speaking of corrupted files, of cameras under maintenance. The millionaire crossed his arms and stared at the blank screen as if confronting his own cowardice. "Uncut," he repeated. In the background, through the window, he heard his son's voice counting backwards from somewhere in the house. and he understood that the courage he lacked, the child had in abundance. The password was entered. Fate, at last, was beginning to move the tape. The mansion's security room was cold, lit by blinking black and white screens. Nothing went unnoticed there, or at least it shouldn't. The millionaire entered unannounced, his tie loosened and his face tense. The security chief, surprised, stood up quickly, trying to hide his anxiety. "I want the footage from the night that bracelet disappeared and the day it was found," he said, each word sounding like a non-negotiable order. There was a pause. The man cleared his throat, typed passwords, opened folders on the screen. Images began to appear. Empty hallways, employees milling about, the boy running toward the garden. But there were cuts, sudden jumps, seconds that disappeared as if time had stalled. The millionaire leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. Rewind. Again. The boss obeyed. The same emptiness. The same... Cut. In one of the files, the camera clock jumped from 6:45 p.m. to 6:53 p.m. without transition. 8 minutes erased? He asked, his voice thick with disbelief. The boss swallowed hard. "Technical problems, sir. System failures." The man didn't answer. He simply rested his hands on the table and remained motionless, as if weighing every detail. His mind raced. 8 minutes coincided exactly with his wife's exit from the closet and the bracelet's supposed appearance in the pantry. The theater was beginning to dismantle. Further on, another contradiction. The boss had claimed to have found the jewel early in the morning, but the camera showed a light coming on in the pantry around midnight, hours before the public spectacle. The hand that appeared at the edge of the frame wore light-colored gloves, and a metallic glint escaped from the junction of the fingers. A large, unmistakable ring, one he recognized better than any jewel in the safe. His heart raced, but he controlled his reaction. He paused the scene and enlarged the frame. His boss tried to justify himself. "The image isn't clear, it could be a reflection." But the millionaire knew it wasn't a reflection. It was a signature. The anger came not as an explosion, but as silence. He took a step back, shoved his hands in his pockets, and took a deep breath. The lie was right in front of him, almost blatant, but he still needed complete proof. "I want full copies, all of them, and a detailed schedule report," he said, turning to leave. The boss nodded, but his eyes trembled like someone keeping too many secrets. That night, locked in his office, the millionaire spread out the papers he'd received on his desk. Entry times, shift reports, movement maps. The gaps were clear. Unrecorded moments, unaccounted for access, intervals that coincided with his wife's movements. As he watched, his son entered silently, carrying the plastic boat. He placed it on the papers and said, "She said the truth always comes out, even when it's hidden." The millionaire, swallowing the lump in his throat, stroked the boy's hair and simply replied, "Yes, it will come out." In her bedroom, the mistress prepared for another night of peaceful sleep, certain she was in complete control. She didn't realize that the very system she'd used as a platform was already turning against her. The cameras, silent and impassive, had seen more than she'd imagined, and the man who had always remained silent was finally willing to break his silence. The dawn passed slowly but decisively. He didn't sleep. With the little boat on the table and the still partial evidence in hand, he knew the next step was inevitable, gathering what was left of the truth, confronting the facts, and exposing before everyone the farce that had destroyed the maid's life. Not out of heroism, but because the weight of the omission was already sinking him deeper than any lie could. And when morning arrived, bringing light through the glass windows, the millionaire's face bore the expression of one who would never turn back. The mansion, which had so often served as a stage for humiliation, was about to become a courtroom. And this time, the judge would not be his wife's venomous words, but the cold, inescapable images of cameras that never forget. The next morning brought with it the tension of a verdict. The millionaire entered the security room once more, this time without warning, without formalities. The chief was already waiting for him, with a flash drive on the desk, as if handing over a secret he could no longer keep. "These are the complete images, sir," Uncut. His voice was low, almost a whisper. The man picked up the device and, without looking back, went straight to his office. The housekeeper was there, purposefully arranging the books. She didn't say anything, but her eyes followed her master, as if she knew that moment would change the course of everything. He closed the door, connected the flash drive to the computer, and pressed play. The screen filled with empty corridors, then trivial movements, but amidst the grey hours the expected detail appeared like a sudden blow. At 11:58 p.m., the pantry camera captured the silhouette of a woman rushing in. Her face was invisible, but her erect body, her elegant posture, the way she played with her hair, none of it belonged to the maid. Then came the decisive moment. The gloved hand lifted the bracelet, already out of the safe, and placed it among the boxes of groceries. The camera, oblivious to the theatrics, captured a close-up just enough to reveal the enormous ring glinting in the light. The same ring his wife flaunted at parties, photographed in society columns, proudly displayed at dozens of dinners. The millionaire paused the video, zoomed in, and pressed his forehead against the screen. There was no longer any doubt. There was no denying it. His breathing grew heavy. Inside, a mixture of anger and shame rose like fire. Anger for having allowed the injustice, shame for having remained silent when he should have spoken out. The images continued. His wife packing up the boxes, turning off the light, and calmly leaving, as if she had just completed a perfect plan. The clock read 12:03 a.m. Hours later, in the living room, she would stage the discovery. The farce was recorded, intact, proof against any excuse. The millionaire let the video play until the end and leaned back in his chair, exhausted. His son walked in at that moment, holding the drawing of the three figures holding hands. "When will she be back?" he asked innocently. The father couldn't answer. He simply pulled the boy close and pressed him to his chest, as if seeking the strength he had lost. That night, the millionaire went down to the main room alone. He walked through the living room where his wife had so often paraded her vanity and where the maid had been humiliated. He felt the weight of every marble stone, every reflection in the mirrors. The house seemed to judge him too, reminding him that it's not enough to discover the truth, it must be exposed. Silence, once a strategy, was now complicit. He returned to his office, wrote a few quick notes, and organized the evidence. Tomorrow he would gather everyone together, his wife, his employees, his advisors, even guests if necessary. It didn't matter. The lie had lived long enough, and the price of omission had already been high enough. Meanwhile, in the modest guest house where the maid now slept, she prayed quietly, asking only that her name be cleared. She didn't dream of revenge, only of justice. She didn't know that, at that very moment, the mansion's cameras were already screaming for her, and that the wheel of fate was about to turn. The next morning dawned heavily, as if even the heavens sensed that the mansion would cease to be merely a luxurious setting and become a courtroom. The millionaire summoned everyone, employees, close advisors, even some of his wife's most loyal friends. The invitation sounded routine, a security meeting after the rumors about the bracelet, but no one believed it to be just that. There was something different in the tone, a gravity that seeped through even the glass walls. In the main hall, the wife entered first, impeccably dressed. She was dressed in navy blue, the color she usually chose when she wanted to convey seriousness. She greeted her friends with a confident smile, still believing she was in control of the narrative. The maid was not present. She remained distant, living on the sidelines, unaware that her name would be judged again, but this time with witnesses who could not be manipulated. The millionaire arrived with firm steps. There was no rush, but there was no hesitation either. He walked to the head of the table, arranged the papers in front of him, and turned on the projector. The lights dimmed, and the room plunged into anticipation. "They said the trust was betrayed," he began, his deep voice cutting through the air. "Today we will see what really happened." The screen lit up. The video showed the empty pantry at 11:58 p.m. Then the wife's figure hurried in, arranging the boxes. The room fell silent. The metallic glint of the ring appeared on the screen, unmistakable. The gloved hand placed the bracelet among the groceries, turned off the light, and calmly left. The camera clock read 12:03 a.m., and then the recording ended. For a few seconds, no one breathed. The wife's friends looked at each other uncomfortably, trying to maintain their composure. The housekeeper closed her eyes as if finally seeing justice being born. The security chief lowered his head, aware of his omission, and the wife, still standing, lost her color. She tried to laugh, but it died before it could gain a sound. "A montage," she stammered, but the word fell to the floor like broken glass. The millionaire didn't raise his voice. He simply said coldly, "The cameras don't lie. The bracelet wasn't stolen. It was planted." He let the sentence hang in the air, heavy until it became impossible to ignore. Then he added, "And while this was happening, an innocent woman was humiliated in front of everyone." The wife's friends began to drift away. One of them, visibly uncomfortable, gathered her purse and left without saying goodbye. The room, which had so often echoed with ostentatious laughter, was now a space of embarrassment and shame. The wife tried to catch her breath, but every word that came out sounded like a poorly worded excuse. I was just—" She didn't finish. There was no more speech possible. At that moment, all eyes turned to the millionaire, and for the first time in years, he didn't shy away from the weight of his own silence. "My mistake was not speaking up sooner," he said, "but I won't make the same mistake again." The words echoed not only in the room, but also within himself like a promise. Outside, the rumors were beginning to shift. What had once been a whisper of scandal now became a secret of revenge. The boss, unmasked, exposed by her own arrogance, the mansion built on appearances, was beginning to crack. And soon, it wouldn't just be her reputation that would fall, it would be her entire empire of vanity. The millionaire turned off the projector. The light returned to the room, but the glow was no longer on the jewelry or the dresses. It was, in fact, that he had finally found room to breathe. His wife, once the absolute mistress of the stage, was now nothing more than a shadow on the verge of ruin. The room was still filled with the silence of the revelation when the millionaire turned off the projector. The lights once again illuminated every detail of the marble, but nothing had the same brilliance. His wife, once the absolute mistress of the scene, seemed small before everyone. Her eyes wandered as if searching for a non-existent exit. Her friends, once accomplices in laughter and gossip, kept their distance. The weight of the truth had not only cracked her mask, it had shattered her invisible crown. The millionaire took a deep breath, looked up, and spoke as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Injustice is a poison, and I allowed it to be served in this house." The phrase echoed in the hall, each word piercing the hearts of those present. An innocent woman was humiliated, accused, and nearly destroyed by a lie. And I remained silent. Today, no longer. His gaze met the housekeeper's, then the head of security, who lowered, his head in shame. Finally, he looked at his wife, his voice firm. "What you built on rumors has crumbled before the one thing that cannot be corrupted, the truth." The wife, in a last-ditch attempt to regain ground, stood up and theatrically raised her hand. "I did it for the good of the family," she shouted, but her voice trembled, fragile, lacking its former strength. The son, sitting in a corner, broke the silence, and, with the innocence that cuts deeper than any sentence, said, "Family doesn't lie, and she never lied." He pointed to the maid who, hurriedly summoned by the housekeeper, had entered discreetly, and now stood motionless near the door, surprised to be brought back to the place from which she had been expelled. All eyes turned to her. The young woman, her posture firm despite her racing heart, said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to contrast with her employer's desperation. The millionaire walked over to her, took the small plastic boat from his pocket and placed it in her hands. "My son smiles again because of you. He sleeps in peace because of you. And your name will be cleared no matter the cost." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The wife let out a nervous laugh, but no one joined in. Instead, embarrassment spread among those present. One of her friends, who had laughed at her so much at previous parties, now muttered, How could she? Another discreetly gathered her belongings and left without saying goodbye. The network of power that had sustained her mistress was dissolving before their very eyes. The millionaire took the maid's hand and lifted it into the air, not as a romantic gesture, but as a public declaration that truth had prevailed. In this house, lies will never again be greater than dignity. The room erupted in murmurs of approval. The head of security approached, embarrassed, apologizing for his silence. The housekeeper, with discreet tears, whispered to the young woman, "I knew it." The mistress, unable to bear the scene, left the hall with hurried steps. Her figure, once so feared, was now nothing more than a fleeing shadow, and the mansion, which had so often echoed her cruel orders, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief with her absence. The son ran to the maid and hugged her tightly. "I told you you had courage," he murmured, as he hung the string medal back around her neck. The millionaire watched, moved, and in that instant he understood. This wasn't just about justice, but about a new beginning. That night the town was buzzing about what had happened. She was no longer the thieving maid, but the woman who endured in silence and was exalted by the truth. The rumor, once poison, was now a testament to dignity. Karma had played its part precisely. Those who humiliated were humiliated. Those who tried to destroy were destroyed. And those who suffered in silence were elevated before everyone. When the lights went out and the hall emptied, the maid stepped out into the garden, feeling the wind touch her face like a promise of freedom. Beside her, the boy ran with the little boat in his hands, and the millionaire walked in silence, carrying on his shoulders no longer the weight of a mission, but the commitment to never again allow lies to override the truth. Fate had finally given each person what they deserved, and the mansion, which had been the scene of pain and injustice, now became a symbol of redemption. That night, the mansion was not only the stage for revelations, but also the setting where fate fulfilled its promise. Those who humiliated were humiliated, those who slandered were unmasked, and those who suffered in silence were exalted before all. The wheel of karma turned, returning to each the reflection of what they sowed. And amidst so much empty luxury, only that which cannot be bought shone: the truth. If this story touched your heart, like it now and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss the next stories of pain, courage, and twists and turns that fate always has in store for you.